Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry that we're starting a few minutes late. This is the monthly meetup that I do. We are alternating these days between in-person 1 month and virtual the next month. We get pretty good attendance on the virtual, but I much prefer the in-person because the interaction is richer. So I received about a dozen questions before now, and I'm going to go through those questions, and I'm going to turn to Lindsay and ask her if there are any additional questions. Lindsay, let's remind everyone, how do people submit questions?
They can message us on social media, and also it seems like we're only live on our YouTube channel, which is chairmanmendelsohn.com/live.
So we apparently are live only on the YouTube channel, which is chairmanmendelsohn.com
.com/live.
slash live. That's YouTube, chairmanmendelsohn.com/live.
And they can ask questions in the chat, the live chat there.
You can ask questions in the live chat there, or you can try to reach us via social media, which I think means what, texting?
Means email
Email.
at chairmancs@dccouncil.gov.
Emailing chairmancs@dccouncil.gov.
dccouncil.gov. Messaging us on X, Instagram, or Blue Sky.
Message us at X,
Instagram,
or Blue Sky. I think I would have that memorized. First question I got was, what plans do you have to reopen and amend the comprehensive plan in council period 26? Do you have goals for this new land use master plan? I believe that the Office of Planning will be submitting a proposed revisions to the comprehensive plan. I hope will actually be a new comprehensive plan. They'll be submitting it in either 2026 or 2027. I don't have the date in front of me, but they will not be introducing it this year. The council does not have the ability under the Home Rule Act to open the comprehensive plan. It has to be submitted by the mayor before we can make any changes or consider any changes that are being proposed. So there are no plans for calendar year 2025 with regard to the comprehensive plan. The second question regarding Initiative 83, according to LIMS, which is Legislative Information Management System, that's what we call the I guess I would say the database on the council's website for looking at legislation. According to LIMS, after DC voters voted in favor of Initiative 83, it was transmitted to the mayor, then enacted without the mayor's signature, and now is retained by the council. What does retained by the council mean? What are the council's next steps on Initiative 83? Will there be hearings? Will there be an opportunity to amend the initiative before it is sent to the U.S. Congress for review? The answer is, our general counsel has not enrolled the bill and given it to me for transmittal to Congress. So I haven't gotten it, and it has not been transmitted to Congress. When I get it, I expect I will proceed to sign the transmittal so that it can be sent to Congress. Retained by the council simply means that it has not been referred to any committee. So the next steps would be for the bill to be enrolled, for me to sign the transmittals, and for it to be sent to Congress. The initiative was, my understanding is that the initiative is subject to funding, and so there would need to be funding. I will say that I find that irritating because the Home Rule Act is quite clear that measures that have an effect on the budget are not appropriate for an initiative. The proponents got around that by getting a legal opinion that changes the rules. In other words, what the process has been for the last 45 years is apparently no longer the process. And even if it has an effect on the budget, it can be considered by the voters subject to appropriation. I do not know whether the mayor will put it in her proposed budget or what will happen in that regard. The next question is, what's your perspective of how Congress has interfered with DC governance before, and what subject matters may be targets for GOP lawmakers in the next few years? Is there anything the council can do to defend itself in that regard? My answer is this. I have brought somebody on my staff, this was over a year ago, to work full-time with congressional offices, congressional committees, congressional staff, so that we are much more on top of what's going on between us and Congress. That is, that we will know as quickly as possible where there may be concerns from members of Congress. We will know much more quickly any bills that have been introduced. We will know of hearings. We will be in a better position to advocate or defend before Congress. The part of the question is my perspective on how Congress has interfered in the past. Well, the worst was the criminal code, which I continue to remind folks was grossly misstated as weakening our laws with regard to crime, when in fact it actually strengthened our laws, as well as creating a better criminal code that is a cohesive, coherent body of work, as opposed to something that's been adopted 120 years ago and then amended piecemeal over the subsequent decades. Very easy to misunderstand it, because that's what happens when we talk about criminal justice. And so it was misunderstood to be softer on crime, when in fact it was just the opposite. Be that as it may, that was really a bad moment for DC congressional relations, and has made the last year and a half worse, because it has emboldened members of Congress to try to interfere more. The mayor and I testified before a House Appropriations Subcommittee a week ago. And I think they expected that we were going to be kind of stupid or Bush League, or really not have a good story to tell. And we were there with the chief financial officer, and all three of us emphasized that the city is actually very well run and in a much better financial situation than other cities around the country. So we're trying to get that message across. I think that the Republican members of the House subcommittee were surprised. But on the other hand, I think that our presentation was such to minimize any, to minimize chances for additional interference. But I do think the next couple of years are going to be difficult. And we are looking at building capacity and being in a better position to be both proactive and defensive in whatever mischief there lies. Next question, can you talk about RFK and the potential for the commanders to return to DC? My understanding is that the legislation that extends the lease to the district for the RFK site is probably going to get through the House and Senate this month. The bill doesn't require that there has to be a stadium there, but it allows for it, just as that has always been the case. With regard to the potential for the commanders to return, I believe that the mayor has been very much involved in negotiating with whoever will listen to get the commanders to come back to DC. I certainly have no problem with that, but I'm more focused on other issues like education and public safety and affordable housing. If a proposal does materialize, it would have the commanders relocate to the RFK site. I would be supportive of that, but that's in the distance. That is, well, that comes after many other steps, the first of which is whether Congress is going to pass the legislation that gives us greater control over that land. I'll just end with this, and that is I've been consistent in saying that the district government should not pay for a stadium. This is not a good investment of public dollars. Relative to other sports, there are very few games. And we already have other stadiums that host events that a football stadium would compete with. But I'm fine with there being a stadium and a stadium at the RFK site, but not public dollars going into it. And that includes with the infrastructure, the horizontal costs, which is just a way of putting a misleading label on government money subsidizing a stadium. Next question. Do you anticipate that the responsibility for oversight of ANCs by the council might be moved to another council member in the organization of the council in January? If so, can you share what your thinking along that line is at this point in time? As I'm sitting here, cannot say whether the responsibility for oversight of ANCs will shift from the Housing Committee to another committee. Not only can I say, but if I did know, I probably wouldn't say, because I typically don't release that information until I share it with colleagues. Next question. Do you have a general idea of when performance oversight hearings will begin in the new year, such as not before such and such date? This information would give us some insight to enable us to know the timetable for the preparation of our testimony. I wish I could be helpful in that regard. We did pick a date of, I believe it's April 2nd for the mayor's submission of the budget. That's about 10 days later than in the past. We picked a later date for two reasons. One, because the mayor's folks asked us to have a later date to accommodate the fact that the budget is based on the February 28th revenue estimates, and they need more than 2 weeks to be able to prepare a final budget. And then also the chief financial officer has begun insisting that the CFO needs 10 days after pencils down to print the budget books. That's something I've actually pushed back on. So performance oversight will probably be the same schedule as this year, but a couple of weeks later. The schedule will be adopted by the council in January, probably at our committee of the whole meeting, which I believe is the 21st of January. Last question I have that was prepared earlier. If Tran White is expelled, what happens to the Ward 8 seat? Will Ward 8 residents have an opportunity to select the replacement, special election, etc.? What is the timeline for the subsequent actions after a decision is finalized? So I have noticed a hearing on January 28th. There will not be public testimony at the hearing, although it will be a public hearing. This will be an opportunity for Councilmember White to present his defenses as to why he should not be expelled. Following the hearing, I will move a resolution that I think it's the February 3rd council meeting. We have to, under our rules, give a council member at least 30 days. I think it's between 30, not less than 30 and not more than 45 days after the ad hoc committee has made its recommendation, gives the council member an opportunity to present his or her case. And so that's why it's January 28th. Also, in that count of 30 to 45 days, days of council recess are not included. The council's on recess for 1 week after Christmas. If Mr. White is expelled, the seat would be vacant. And my recollection, but I've not checked this recently, is that it remains vacant until it is filled by a special election. The special election would be scheduled by the Board of Elections, but the statute does have a timeline for that. Lindsay, those are all the questions I got before the.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, a couple of follow-up. What is the council envisioning for the site where the RFK Stadium now sits? Couldn't the city use the $3 billion on something better than a football team? I don't know where $3 billion came from.
Okay, so the question was, what's the council's vision for the RFK site? There was a second question, but let me just answer the first one. The council doesn't have a vision at this point. I'm assuming that because the mayor has made quite clear that she really, 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 really wants a football stadium there and get the Commanders, that will be a proposal that gets submitted to the council. I expect that there will be mixed use development around a stadium, so that would be a considerable amount of affordable housing, as well as some other, a mix of uses that could be office or retail. That's what I'm expecting. What was the other part?
Couldn't the city use $3 billion on something better than a football team? I assume that
Couldn't
is an
the city
estimate
better
on how
use
much
$3 billion for something other than a football team? Well, I don't know where the figure 3 billion comes from.
Nor do I, but I'm assuming it is an estimation of how much a stadium.
I don't know if you all
costs.
can hear Lindsay. I don't know where this figure 3 billion comes from that's in the question. We do know that stadiums cost a lot of money, in the billions. The mayor has suggested that she thinks the city should pay for infrastructure costs, which could be a couple $100 million. I don't agree. But I think that's the upside of what we would spend. Lindsay?
What can DC do to better police bad landlords? I think there was a story that came up.
The police bad what?
Landlords?
What can the city do to better police bad landlords? Well, that is a tough question. I think since we've gotten an elected attorney general, that we have seen that our attorney general is much more aggressive in going after slumlords. That's not solving the problem, but it's definitely helpful. I have oversight over the Department of Buildings, and we have been pressing the Department of Buildings to improve its inspection process, inspections of existing apartment buildings, but also proactive inspections. I didn't say that very well. So most inspections are reactive. Tenant complains, Department of Housing comes out, inspects the unit. A proactive inspection, the department just picks a building somewhere in the city and says, we're going to go and we're going to inspect maybe 10% of the units, 30% of the units. And the percentage, well, we have a bill that we moved that actually needs to be funded that correlates the percentage of units to be inspected with the total number of units in a building. In any event, that would be proactive. So those are really the two strategies. Is it enough? 3 strategies: proactive, reactive inspections, and the attorney general. Is it enough? I would say no, but we would be hard pressed to put more, yes, to put more. Are there other strategies? Well, tenants have recourse through the Rental Housing Act. Going to court regarding housing conditions. And I'm always open to suggestions. Lindsay?
What is your vision for the next council period and the new council itself?
What's my vision for the next council period and the new council? So the new council isn't going to be much different. We have a new council member for Ward 7, Wendell Felder, and I would be surprised if the council didn't go along with the ad hoc committee recommendation to expel Trayon White. Yes, it's true he could run in a special election, just as Jack Evans ran in a special election after he resigned. I have no idea if that would be successful. So the seat may be in limbo for a while. But other than that, there's no change in the council. There was more to that question, Lindsay.
Your vision for the next council period, and then the council itself, which,
Vision for the next council. Well, I would like to see us do much more with affordable housing. And I have been quite involved with public education. I would like to see us, I would like to see the public education system to go much further in terms of reducing turnover of principals and teachers and to improve attendance, and also to work on improving academic scores in math and English. So that's with regard to English. I don't know, the priorities are really housing, public safety and education in my mind.
how is the council preparing for a Trump presidency with the House and the Senate in Republican control?
I kind of answered that already, how the council's preparing for the trifecta of the House, Senate, and the White House being under Republican control. We're building capacity, both the council and the mayor, monitoring more closely, and it's difficult to have an action before knowing exactly what we're reacting to, but being prepared.
Some accounts are that the Road Act was gutted to appease the mayor. Do you see the Road Act as having any effect?
Questions about the Road Act. Now, the Road Act is a bill that was introduced at the request of the Attorney General. I think it was, ROAD is an acronym for Recidivism Oversight, Accountability at DYRS. And the question is whether, some people have said that it's been gutted. And so has it been, and what's the effect of the bill? So one of my colleagues at the breakfast yesterday before our legislative meeting made the unfortunate comment that he thought the bill had been gutted, and I made it clear I disagreed. There are a number of provisions in the bill. They all have to do with better planning for appropriate services to help juveniles who've been committed to the custody of DYRS. The whole purpose of the juvenile justice system is that kids are treated differently than adults, recognizing that there is a greater chance that they can be saved, if you will, and redirected from a life of crime. Kids who have committed offenses serious enough that they're actually committed to DYRS are at the deep end of the system. That's what's often the way it's put. The research is quite clear that programming can have a positive effect on kids. And in order to do the appropriate programming, there needs to be what's called a risk needs assessment of the individual juvenile. And then out of that is developed a rehabilitation plan. What kind of services? Could it be psychological? Maybe it's substance abuse oriented. Maybe it's life skills. I'm just at the moment just making up examples, but services are developed pursuant to a rehabilitation plan. And DYRS has not been doing this. At one point a few years ago, they were doing this, but they've not. The bill introduced by the Attorney General specified these different steps: the risk needs assessment, the rehabilitation plan, an exit plan upon actual placement, requirement for services within, well, this is the language we took out, within 30 days. It was that language that we took out that said that services had to be provided within 30 days or the kid could go to court, that we took out of the bill. But that's not the same as gutting the bill, because all the other requirements remain in place. The requirement for a risk needs assessment and a timeline for doing that, which is before the court actually orders to commit the child. The need for a real rehabilitation plan, that's still in the bill. and that has to be done before commitment, if I remember correctly. And that services have to be provided. The implementation of services after placement in a secure facility. All those are still in the bill. So I would not say the bill's been gutted. I do think, and I've said this, that I think the mayor underappreciates the importance of rehabilitation and trying to turn these kids around. That with juvenile justice especially, the goal is not just simply to lock up the kids, but to provide services so that when they get out, which they will, that there's a better chance that they will do well in the community. Next question.
This is breaking news. Republicans have rejected House Speaker Johnson's bipartisan plan to avert the government shutdown. Would you like to react to that? So there is no CR as of now, which means no RFK. What are your thoughts?
So I don't know if you can hear Lindsay because she's being very soft-spoken today, but apparently the next question is that the House rejected the leadership's continuing resolution for the budget, which would include RFK. I think Congress will work this out. This is not the way I would do a budget. I would have had a budget adopted before September 30th, which is the start of the fiscal year. Gosh, the council had its budget adopted in June, which is what, 4 months before the start of the fiscal year. But I suspect that the House will work this out. Next question.
I saw the council gave Vince Gray an award to celebrate his legacy. When is the hospital he championed finally going to be done?
When is the hospital going to be done? The full question was, I saw that the council gave an award to Vince Gray. That's actually not quite correct. The council, this is a long-standing tradition that when a member departs from the council, that we, at the last legislative meeting, we have a ceremony of sorts, present the council member with a crystal bowl and make remarks regarding the council member. And that's what happened yesterday. And many people said it was very touching. It was touching. There were easily a half dozen people in attendance who had been on Vince Gray's council staff when he was chairman 14 years ago. I mean, it was just remarkable to see them all come back. And there was family and, of course, quite a number of his staff when he was mayor and his current staff. It's very sad that Vince's health has declined, but it was great to see him at this ceremony. He came in for this ceremony. We interrupted the council meeting to make remarks and present him with the bowl. But it was not a reward. It was just, an award. It was not an award. It was a ceremony thanking him. The question, though, is when is the hospital going to be completed? I don't know the exact date, but my understanding is it'll be next year. That's 2025. Hospital's under construction. And all the pieces are getting lined up for it to open and be in service. Lindsay?
Actually, don't have any more questions.
There are no more questions.
You can talk about something that you'd like to talk about.
Oh, so Lindsay's asking me, she has a question. Can I talk about whatever I want to talk about?
There you go.
We'll see if there are any more questions that show up. So later this week, possibly tomorrow, I will be presenting a reorganization plan for the next council period. I developed that plan after talking to all the members and ascertaining what they like and what they don't like about their responsibilities and the council's organization in general. And then out of that, I identify consensus, and that's the basis of the plan that I will put forward. The following week, meaning next week, I will be working with staff on the council rules for next council period. One of the things about legislatures that I've come to realize is that legislatures are very rules oriented. And if that sounds like that's not a good idea, it's actually very important because with, in our case, 13 members, other legislatures, typically more members, members will do whatever they can and there'll be no order or precedent without having rules. So the rules are very important. And I don't expect that the rules will be very different for next year than they are this year. But every 2 years when we do this, we learn from events over the past couple of years that maybe the rules could have been clearer or could have been a little bit different. We're going through this expulsion process right now. And we're just identifying some areas where maybe it could be done a little bit differently. In this case, right now, our rules, the ad hoc committee had 90 days. I appointed it in the summer. And the ad hoc committee interpreted the rules as 90 days from when the council came back from recess, not when I appointed them, which I'm fine with, but the rules maybe should be clearer in that regard. These are just examples of where we'll be making some changes in the rules. I know that we get input from citizens about ways that we could make the process, the legislative process, more accessible or transparent to the public. And while that generally my view is that we should be accessible and transparent, I believe strongly that the council has as its number one duty to be able to conduct oversight and enact policy through legislation. Just to illustrate what I mean here, I know that it's very inconvenient to the public when we say we're going to meet at noon and then we don't meet until 1 or 1:30. That's because members are talking in an open meeting, a meeting that I believe our legislative breakfasts are televised, that we're talking in an open meeting that the public can see informally about the legislation and working out issues, which makes the meeting much more productive. 2 weeks ago, we had a bill and there was an amendment that was drafted on the dais to deal with a issue that was identified during the debate. Nothing really wrong with that, except it was very poorly written. And if the idea for that had been identified and discussed at the breakfast, then there would have been more time for staff to work on it and come up with language that worked. Instead, we had to revisit it yesterday because the way the amendment applied was, everybody agreed was unreasonable and not what was intended. So all this is to make the point that, in my view, the most important job the council has with legislating is to be able to come up with good legislation. We are not, this is going to sound horrible, and Lindsay, don't jump on me for the way I'm saying this, but we're not like a entertainment event where we sell tickets and the show starts at 1 and you have a right for the show to start at 1. We're a legislator that's adopting laws and it's a public process and the public gets to see it. And sometimes that means that it is inconvenient because things start late because of discussions. There might be a recess. There might be some conversations that go on between a couple of members on the dais. And that's just the way it works in order to come up with a better product. And the public gets to see all that. I've been going on and on buying time. Do you have some more questions?
Dude. Someone is asking about a noise task force, having mentioned that the task force was quietly placed on pause by DCRA when DOB and DCLP was created. Can you help revive the task force as the neighborhoods need the resources to investigate and resolve noise complaints?
Question has to do with noise, and apparently there was a noise task force when DCRA existed, the Department of Consumer Regulatory Affairs. The noise task force, according to the questioner, was put on hold when DCRA was split into Department of Buildings and Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection. To be honest with you, I don't remember the noise task force. The question was whether it could be revived. I could certainly look at that, but this fall we've passed 3 bills related to noise. We passed the Residential Tranquility Act, which prohibits events that make, if I remember correctly, with amplified noise of any kind, between the hours of 7 p.m. and 9 a.m. That's residential tranquility. We adopted the Amplified Sound Mitigation Act that makes it easier to enforce loud noise wherever it occurs in the city. Instead of requiring that there has to be a decibel measurement from inside a residential unit near where the noise is, that instead the noise is measured at the source of the sound with a decibel level, which if I remember correctly is 90 decibels in a residential zone. And if anyone thinks 90 is too loud, the decibels dissipate by 6 decibels every doubling of distance. So if it's 90 decibels at 5 feet, and at 10 feet, it's 84 decibels. But this would be 90 decibels at the source. That's the Amplified Sound Mitigation Act. And then we also adopted the Harmonious Living Act, which aims to revise the building code to require more attention to soundproofing in certain areas of the city, and then also residential disclosures at the time of a sale of a residence. So there are 3 bills that have just gone through the council this fall dealing with noise. Nonetheless, I'll put it on the list to look at. Next, Lindsay.
Apparently there was a ABCA ANC ad hoc committee. This is a question about having an ABCA ANC ad hoc committee. Apparently there was one created for vacant properties. Would you consider creating one for alcohol code reform?
Would I consider a working group to look at alcohol reform? I don't quite like the way I put that, but and the questioner references a working group that we put together regarding vacant property. My office has oversight over Department of Buildings and therefore the vacant property laws. And so it was my staff to put together this working group. It was actually my staff who did it. It wasn't something that I did formally. ABCA, Alcohol Beverage Cannabis Administration. ABCA is under a different committee, and it would be up to the chair of that committee, Kenyon McDuffie, whether to put together a working group to look at this. Lindsay?
There was an international water spa company that was looking to come to DC. Do you know if Thermi is still coming? And if so, is there any new information?
International water spa company that was looking to come to DC. The name was Therm.
Yes, and RFK site was one of their considerations.
RFK site was one of their considerations. Do I know anything about whether they're still coming? So my recollection is in the news a year ago, the mayor announced that there was a entertainment company that's international that was looking to do something in DC and got a 1-year option. I'm not quite sure what went with the option. I've heard nothing more, which makes me think that it's not going to happen. It was not something the council voted on, and there was no obligation on the part of the government that I know of that involved costs. Lindsay,
That's it. That's all I had.
we're out of questions again?
Questions.
So what else can I talk about? I am hopeful that with the coming year that the council will give more attention to housing and affordable housing issues. It's a bit obvious to say this, but if there are not enough units in the law of supply and demand, will force up prices. And that is a factor in the high cost of housing in the city. On the other hand, it is impossible to build all of the units that we need in 1 or 2 or 3 years. Banks simply will not finance it. The government doesn't have enough money to support that. So this is going to continue to be a problem. I feel that the city government has not been as effective as it could be, or as targeted in programs that will have a benefit. We need to increase both the supply of market rate as well as affordable housing, and at the same time, make sure that we are maintaining the affordable housing that we have. And that's both housing that's been subsidized by the city, as well as housing that in some areas of the city, the market rate is pretty close to what's affordable for working men and women. And I feel like the city could do a much, much better job with a coordinated plan that both creates more housing and preserves what we've got. So I would like to see the council give more attention to that next year. And I would add there are a number of programs that we have that I think are not being run very well. The voucher program, we're seeing a lot of complaints in some areas that their apartment buildings have just been taken over by vouchers. And what I mean by that literally is if there are 100 units, now 60, 70% of them are occupied by residents with vouchers. And that almost feels like the building is becoming something like public housing. I also think that the Housing Authority needs to do a better job, and DHS, with ensuring that folks who have vouchers are complying with the law as well as with regulations. In other words, not being a disturbance. I kind of feel like it sounds horrible what I'm saying, but a lot of complaints about drug use and violent acts. And obviously that's not everybody, that's a small number, but I don't feel like the city is being very aggressive in stopping that. And then that just makes it more difficult for all the other well-abiding voucher holders. So, and then some of these programs, where they're being run like rapid rehousing, where the city just got to a point where they decided this year they were going to exit something close to 1,500 families from rapid rehousing, even though the families had no place to go. But sorry, we're just going to cut you off from the program. Having kept them on the program much longer than was ever intended for the program. So it's a mess. And I'm hopeful that the city will do better, and the council with its oversight will do better over the coming year. Lindsay, have I prompted any more questions?
Yes, can you break down how you define affordable housing?
Can I
Also,
break down how I define affordable housing?
yes,
also-
also, is there an effort toward middle income housing? So,
Is there an effort toward middle income housing? So the law breaks down 3 or 4 different categories of affordability. There's extremely low income, and working. It's not called working class. I don't have the right word.
working class, isn't it?
I don't think it's working class. I can't remember the correct term. The last category, the working, is roughly 80% to 120% AMI. When I say that, AMI is area median income. AMI varies whether you're talking about a household of one or a household of, well, it varies with the size of the household. So I could not give you a specific number. Very, 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 very roughly, extremely roughly, $100,000 would be working. Below $30,000 a year would be extremely low income.
Workforce housing.
Workforce, that's the word I was looking for, workforce housing.
The follow-up was, is there an effort toward, middle income housing, meaning price lower than market rate, but not extremely low?
Is
So
there an effort toward
workforce housing,
middle
income.
income? Well, that would be,
But-
as I understand the question, that would be what we call workforce. Just, if I remember correctly, 80 to 120% AMI, area median income.
Yes, is there an effort to like make more? of that?
There's an effort to create housing at all levels. Extremely low income, workforce housing, and market. City does not subsidize market rate housing. But there needs to be more market rate housing, because otherwise what we see is folks who have means go into neighborhoods that have right now, let's say, workforce housing, and they buy up that housing and drive up the prices. That's actually good for the folks who are selling, because they make a profit if they're being smart as opposed to being taken advantage of. But that's not a desirable trend. So we want an affordable neighborhood to remain affordable, and we want to have more market rate housing, so rich people aren't buying up affordable housing, and we want to have more extremely low income housing for people who need to be housed and can't afford it. I think we're out of questions again.
Yep.
6 more minutes. One more question. Come on, Lindsay.
I have a question that I meant to ask earlier. How do we prevent school closures like the one that happened at Eagle Academy?
How do you prevent school closures like the one that happened at Eagle Academy? For those who don't know, Eagle Academy was a public charter school. In August, beginning of August, the Public Charter School Board met to consider a proposal that Eagle Academy would merge with Friendship Public Charter Schools and remain open to the school year. The Public Charter School Board rejected that. I think the vote was like 4-3, or maybe I should say 3-4. And the next day, the Eagle Academy Board voted to relinquish their charter, which had the effect of closing the school. And that was maybe 2 weeks before the start of the school year, which forced everybody to scramble, because there were roughly a couple hundred students. These were all like 3rd grade and younger that now had no school. And if I say a couple hundred, I can't remember. It might have been, I just can't remember if it was 150 or 350 kids. At any rate, I was discussing that with the Deputy Mayor for Education today. And I think we'll be looking at legislation in early next year that would require better training for board members. And also looking at whether there's some requirements we should put in the law so that the Public Charter School Board is looking more aggressively at red flags or warning signs about a school and its finances. So Eagle Academy got into trouble. Well, I'm going to say for a number of reasons, but there were several red flags. One was that for a while, the chief executive officer and the controller were one and the same person. So the person who is doing the accounting is also the person who's making the decisions on how to spend the money, and that's not a good practice. The school had seen significant decline in its enrollment, if I remember correctly, from something like 800 students, maybe even 900, to less than 300. That does make me think it was 350. So that's a 50% decline, 60% decline in its enrollment. Meanwhile, its expenses were not dropping that at that rate. So expenses became relative to enrollment much higher, and that's messed up. then the school was not maintaining the required minimum cash on hand. When I say required minimum, the public charter school board says that schools should have, if I remember correctly, 45 days cash on hand. I don't know if it's really required. That's the standard, but the school was not meeting that standard and nothing was being done. These are all examples of red flags. And but in retrospect, it is clear that the public charter school board should have acted earlier, much earlier, and much earlier than it did. And it's also clear that what happened in the last couple of months of Eagle's existence was very haphazard and not thought through. So a merger plan was put together with Friendship, but it wasn't vetted with the public or with the school, public charter school board, or with, I'm not sure who. The public charter school board wasn't ready for it. And so they rejected it. And then the next day, the charter is relinquished by the Eagle Academy. So rather than looking at a goal, which would be for the school to not summarily close, or the goal could be for the school to stay open for the school year, or a goal of, let's say, the school to close over the next, by December. Instead, it just all of a sudden closed. And so there are lessons to be learned, and we'll be looking at legislation. Anything else, Lindsay? Well, I think we're 1 minute short of 6 o'clock. I want to thank everybody who came and joined today. The next meetup has not been scheduled. But we'll do it in January. And if I have my way, we'll do it in person. And we probably will not do it outdoors, like at an outdoor cafe, because it'll be January. Probably do it indoors. You all have happy holidays.